Hello, dear participants. Hello, and welcome to the first online conference held in the framework of the Creative Europe funded project iCoDaCo. My name is Johan Flock. I'm the director of the French capacity building platform FACE, one of the 12 partners of this project, and I will be your host today. For participants with visual impairment, I am a white man in my 40s with brown, graying hair and facial hair. I wear blue glasses, and today I wear a blue jumper. Thank you for registering and participating to this online conference that you might be also following from Zoom or on streaming at partner Whole Round TV. Let me give you some practical guidance for this online event. We kindly ask you to mute yourself for now, but you will be invited to post your comments, reflections, and questions to our guest using the chat. The conversation will be captioned live, so don't hesitate to activate your live caption button on Zoom to have a human-generated subtitles in English. This first conference explore the contemporary dance beyond the act of art making itself. We will delve into how dance as a collective practice is situated within society and influenced by the environments which surround it. The conference seeks to foster a dialogue on the sustainability of artistic practice, considering not just the artistic process itself, but the necessary conditions that surround and sustain it. The title of this online conference, Artistic Collective, Sustainability, and the Perpetual State of Emergency, is inspired by the work of a dear colleague, Elena Politseva, author of the State of Culture report commissioned by our colleague organization, the European Advocacy Network Culture Action Europe. This report describes various phenomena, including how Europe is grappling with the rise of right-wing movements, social polarization, and the degradation of democracy. The risks are serious, the stakes are high, and I'm sure we all see them. Yet the future is still predominantly designed in economic terms. Arts and culture remain sidelined. They are seen as weak or less relevant areas. When presenting her report, Elena got the following question from a participant. How and when, in your opinion, this trust in culture was lost? For me, that question captured the idea that cultural policy making has been working hard to justify its existence by aligning causes, whether it's economics, diplomacy, or well-being. The culture sector has also adopted this instrumentalizing approach for survival. As a result, intrinsic value of arts and culture has become a complacent follow concept. That question prompted Elena to publish a follow-up blog article where she observed that instrumentalizing arts and culture hasn't solved the sector's problems. It remains increasingly precarious, and investment in culture has declined over the past decade, despite the data evidence and the beautiful frameworks we were developing to measure the so-called impacts of arts and culture. You will find at the bottom of this page that I'm posting right now in the chat some references, including the ones that I just mentioned. Survival tactics, exclusion processes, power structures, artistic autonomy, and we could collectively add many terms to that list, that frightening list that underlines the tensions around sustainability and the long-term perspective these various definitions bring, and the perpetual state of emergency that artists navigate daily. To start this conversation, we invite our dear colleague Katja Plajnik to make a provocation and throw reflections and questions to the panel that might want to catch later on the conversation. So, Katja, let me introduce you by saying that you are a dear friend, but also a sociologist and an associate professor at the University of Buffalo, where you teach in the arts management program and the Department of Global Gender and Sexuality Studies. Famously, you are the author of the book Artwork, Invisible Labor and the Legacy of Yugoslav Socialism, and co-authored Which Side Are You On? Ideas for Reaching Fair Working Conditions in the Arts. Your research focuses on demystifying creativity and emancipating art as a form of labor using Marxist feminist methodologies to confront the exploitation of unpaid artistic labor. You co-founded the Freelance Art Workers Union in Slovenia, SASUK, and you are preparing a new book, Why Art Workers Don't Want to Get Paid, which is the best title in the world. So, Katja, I give you the floor. I thank you already for accepting this invitation, and I'll let you describe yourself in 2 sentences for participants with visual impairment. Katja, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here, and really thanks for this kind invitation. So yeah, before I forget to describe myself, I'm also a white, curly-haired, short-haired woman with blue glasses and a lot of pink around me. So this is it. And yeah, again, thanks for organizing this, and thank you for inviting. And I'll just begin. Since I'm here to provoke you, I'll start with Emma Goldman's famous words, if I can dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution. Her words resonate deeply, not just because of their anarcho-socialist roots, but because they challenge us to ask, what does it mean to sustain the very practices that make us human? So let me reframe. If cultural labor can sustain me, what revolution are we even talking about? So we're here to talk about sustainability in art and culture. But before we sustain anything, don't we first need to ask, what are we really talking about when we talk about culture's value? Yes, that age-old vexing question, what is culture and what is art, might sound boring, but I promise you I'm not here to bore you. I am here to point out the bigger question we often miss. So culture, as we know today, is a deeply Western concept, often wielded in violent and exclusionary ways. From colonial plunder to modern gentrification, culture has justified harm while claiming to unite and elevate. Western European male philosophers and sociologists historically framed culture as an immaterial, spiritual essence detached from material realities. And even though critical thinkers like Herbert Marcuse explained the affirmative character of culture, how, even in critique, it serves to affirm the capitalist system, we fail to grasp its bourgeois roots and profound ties to historical rise of capitalist economy. So here's the crux. What is so unique about culture in society that invented art at the end of the 19th century as a uniquely middle-class profession? This notion that art exists disconnected from economy and labor is a lie. Pierre Bourdieu demonstrated cultural production thrives on a disavowed or denied economy. And I argue it also relies on exploitation of labor. So we like to think of art as something we do for love, not money, for freedom and creativity, not labor. But these lofty ideas obscure the labor behind the finished work. For instance, a playwright editing tirelessly, the musician rehearsing countless hours, all unpaid and done for art's sake. These ideological aspirations are deeply problematic because they obscure the value-generating labor behind the final work. If we think, or if we want to think beyond art making itself, and this event today and this conference invites us to do so, we have to confront the capitalist mode of production we live in. So capitalism prioritizes accumulation over meeting basic human needs. And feminists like Maria Mies or Veronica Benholt-Thompson remind us that to change this, we must redefine the economy's goals. So from commodity and surplus value production to subsistence, they suggest. From violence of patriarchal capitalist accumulation that destructs humans and nature on a global scale, to economy that focuses on production of life. But we can do so if we cling to the myth of culture's exceptionality rooted in capitalist class-biased grounds. So from my labor-focused viewpoint, culture rests on some unsustainable foundations. First, the idea that art is not work. Second, the idea that art is autonomous and free. And third, the idea that art is unrelated to subsistence. So these myths obscure an important fact that culture is not beyond existing socio-economic system, but it is deeply enmeshed in it. These myths about art's nature and autonomy create a paradox that becomes clear when we examine how culture is instrumentalized under neoliberal capitalism. So this paradox becomes evident, for instance, when we critique culture instrumentalization for economic growth, a hallmark of neoliberal policies. Think of artists or arts districts in cities around the globe, from Toronto, Vienna to Beijing, designed to attract tourists and wealth. These projects too often displace working class communities, turning culture into a tool for gentrification and commodification. But we rarely ask, on whose backs do these processes take place? It is rarely the administrators or executives in cultural institutions who bear the burden. It is artists and cultural workers who carry the weight, often without recognition or fair compensation. Yes, culture does generate economic growth, but we fail to confront the labor exploitation inherent in this process. So this brings me to my central provocation for today. Cultural labor is value generating. Recognizing this is essential to any conversation about sustainability. If we truly value art and culture, we must value the labor that sustains them. This doesn't mean turning art workers into money-making entities. It means centering the labor process, which is why I write artwork as two words, to emphasize that art is not simply a product, it's a labor process. This labor, often invisible, is foundational to building sustainable cultural practice. When we acknowledge that our work generates value, not just cultural, but social and economic, we can start advocating for payment and fair and not special treatment. So feminist thinkers like Maria Mies and Silvia Federici reminds us, exploitation, not lack of value, explains why labor often goes unpaid. This is true in art as it is in unpaid domestic work. Recognizing this is not just about art. It's about all of us and how we build a world that values life over profit. So we are not special or exceptional, as the myth of culture suggests. We are essential and exploited workers. In cultural labor, this exploitation is doubled. First, through the invisibility of the labor process, and then through the ideological mystification of creativity as innate artistic or creative genius or passion, which is divorced from material conditions. So, what can we do? I suggest we must organize, not just to demand fair wages and working conditions, but to reclaim the understanding of our labor as value generating. Collective organizing, like the wave of art museum unions across the US or even the SUK in Slovenia, shows us what is possible. As labor organizer Jane McAlevey emphasized, effective organizing sees workers as whole people with diverse lives and communities. Building collective power allows us to challenge the system that commodify and devalue us. We can center labor justice, and when we center labor justice, we don't merely resist, we transform. We reimagine a field where cultural workers thrive, not as isolated individuals, but as collective, building an equitable future. But the question remains, can we dance the revolution if cultural workers are denied the means to survive? The answer is in our hands: to organize, to resist exploitation, and to create a shared vision of culture as a common good. This is the revolution worth fighting for and dancing to.
Thank you very, very much, Katja, for your provocation. It is fantastic to hear the thoughts that you bring, and that probably the panelists will catch, and the issues you raise, that in a way centers the conversation around how do we value our own practices in the culture field, but also how we collectively organize or act. Well, thank you, Katja. I will now let the panelists actually do this conversation, and I will introduce them very briefly. So let me welcome first Rodia Vomvolu. Rodia is a dancer, dance dramaturge, and a researcher based in between the Netherlands and Greece. Let's say that. Rodia, thank you for accepting to joining this conversation today. You are currently doing a PhD research entitled Unpacking the Self-Positioning of the Dance Dramaturge, Labor, Practices and Discourses in the Periphery and in the Center, under the supervision of Professor Dr. Maaike Blieke at the Utrecht University. As a freelance dance dramaturge, you collaborate with multiple independent dance artists in the Netherlands, in Greece, and in Cyprus. And as a mentor and teacher, you work with several institutions, many dance houses and universities across Europe, from Onassis Stegi to the Academy of Performing Arts in Bratislava, where you were a few days ago. Since 2019, you are a mentor and a co-curator of the artistic residency program, Moving the New, at the dance house Les Mesos in Cyprus. So thank you, Rodia, for being with us. And together with you, we will have Israel Aloni. Israel, you are the artistic director and co-founder of Isle Dance, which you initiated together with Lee Brummer in 2012. Isle Dance is an independent production body which is dedicated to contemporary dance and is operating from Gothenburg in Sweden. You are an independent choreographer, educator, performer, writer, provocator, and your artistic work has been commissioned and presented across Sweden and internationally since 2001. And you've been developing the movement research and development practice titled The Aloni Experience. What is very interesting also for today's conversation is you are the artistic director of Compass, a national infrastructure for young and emerging contemporary dance artists across Sweden. But also you are the architect and the coordinator of iCoDaCo, this massive project that we are developing. And if we're here today, it's probably thanks to your vision, your commitment, and your passion. And to facilitate this conversation, we kindly ask Mila Pavisevic, who is an iCoDaCo partner and contributor, who kindly agreed to moderate the conversation of today. So thank you in advance, Mila, for your facilitation. You're a dramaturg and a dance and theater scholar. Originally from Dubrovnik in Croatia, you now live in Berlin, Germany. You hold an MA in dramaturgy from the Academy of Drama Arts, University of Zagreb, but you are currently a PhD candidate at the Department of Critical Dance Studies at the Free University of Berlin. Your research evolves around the dramaturgical practice from former Yugoslavia and its contribution to Western contemporary dance. And I guess at some point, you and Katja Prajnik will have an interesting conversation. You also work as a dramaturge, mostly for the independent dance scene in Berlin, collaborating with many artists, including Sebastian Matthias and Martin Hansens and many others. So look, Mila, I will give you the floor with pleasure, and please don't forget to describe yourself in 2 sentences for participants with visual impairment. Thank you.
Thank you, Johan, and thank you, Katja. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. My name is Mila. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm participating in iCoDaCo through SM collaborations with Sebastian Matthias, and we are the smallest partner dedicated to research. For the captions, I'm white woman with glasses, and I'm wearing a green shirt. And also, just to say, we are happy to receive your immediate reactions and questions in chat, either to the panelists or to Katja. And we are very happy to be interrupted, to be intervened, and so on. So first, I think I wanted to start, and I think this provocation gives me a good ground to do that, with kind of stating the obvious. And this is that we are acknowledging the state that the world is in, while trying to speak about artistic collectives and something called as this perpetual state of emergency. So we do want to acknowledge also the historical moment we are in, which also consists of conflicts, wars, right wing rising, and also that also often comes with a lot of financial cuts for the artists and innumerable problems for the arts field and the world. So just to say, this should also be part of this conversation. And maybe because it also feels like we live very different realities in Europe, like from Berlin to the different parts in Europe to the world. And I think I'm a big, in that sense, Boris Budin fan that says there are at least 2 Europes within the Europe, but there are also more. I'm focusing on Europe because iCoDaCo is a platform that kind of gathers European collectives. We're going to talk about what that means. So first of all, I would, from that point of, okay, there is trouble and the future looks very grim, I would like to actually to talk about desire and individual practices in relation to this desire. So my first question to Israel would be, why do this? Why insist on working collectively? Israel is one of the main architects of iCoDaCo, and we all know and we could lament here about the inequalities or the exhaustion that comes with collective labor. But I specifically want to look into the desire, the drive that makes you do that, and that what kind of methodologies are necessary to work collectively.
Thank you very much for the presentation, for the provocation, and for the facilitation. So hello everybody. For the description, I am a person with some facial hair and no hair on my head. I have golden hoops in both my ears, and I'm wearing an deep orange, sort of copper colored big sweater because it's very cold here in Brussels, where I'm talking to you from. I think it's a very relevant question when we think about collective in this context of desire, because I think oftentimes we might think about the psychoanalytical perspective on desire. I'm thinking about Lacan in the idea of desiring the thing that we don't have, that is sort of motivated by a sense of lack, maybe something that we never had, and how we are trying to thrive towards an eternal satisfaction that sort of completes the attempt. And that connects to what Katya shared with us in the provocation, this idea of production for completion rather than process-driven experiences. And as Johan mentioned in the introduction, in my artistic practice, I actually call the very practice an experience. I think there's something about experience that allows us to remain in liminal experiences, in liminal expressions and imprints. So in terms of iCoDaCo, it actually started from a very sort of naive curiosity of Lee Brummer, the associate director of IL Dance, and myself, of what would it be like if so-called independent artists, so-called freelancers would share, sort of thinking about a deep sharing practice. What if we share the good and the bad, not only sharing what we have, but also sharing the struggles and sharing the challenges and sharing the difficulties. And it came from the experience that back then we were in our mid-20s and surrounded by people like ourselves who had the intention and the passion and the will to do things. And referring to what Katya said about the unseen labor and the unseen effort, and how value and effort are related. And then also there's this dimension of how artists sometimes undervalue or not value at all the labor that goes unseen, because it's not leading us towards this completion or production or presentation. It's the thing that we cannot actually present in the so-called product. So we started very small in 2012 with inviting a few other artists. I think we were 5 altogether. And we spent time together. We got to learn about each other. We got to learn about each other's practices and got to learn about each other's contexts. And we all spent time in Sweden. The international aspect was more from the experience of the individuals in the project. To cut a very long story short, I would just say that we kept on going. We felt that there was something there. There was some kind of a hint or a hunch that there's some processes that are made possible in this context of deep sharing. Very quickly, after a few iterations, we kind of did it every other year, that dimension of co-creation or co-making or co-practicing became the focal point of the project. In the 2016 already, we had this more international aspect where we actually took the project to travel to the different contexts from which each artist is, also to understand that individuals are part of ecology and ecosystems and how important it is to sense and experience the ecology in which an artist is operating and living, and what that does to their capacity or capability within a collective process. So we back then also started traveling around, and we realized that there's maybe some kind of methodology there that was starting to emerge. And in 2018, it was the first time that we received some European funding to develop it even further. And to be honest, at some point, because the core of the project was really the artistic practice, the fact that it kept on expanding started challenging the sort of integrity of the project itself, because it started becoming something that kind of grows potentially beyond the capacity of itself to hold itself. So when it grew into this European cooperation project sort of context, there was a sense that maybe it was the last time that we do it, because maybe it kind of arrived to a place that it's starting to travel too far away from its very curiosity or from that very desire of the radical sharing, you know, deep sharing. But what was very interesting is that we realized that there's still many layers of criticality that we could apply to this massive claim of international contemporary dance collective. You know, we were a few artists working together in different contexts. So to think about internationality, to think about that we can somehow call what we do contemporary, and that it's relating to dance. You know, if you start really applying criticality to what you do, you realize that all of these sort of images, all of these sort of notions of what is international, what is contemporary, what is dance, and maybe even first and foremost, what is collective, there's a lot of work to still be done.
Maybe there I think that's a good moment to interrupt you, if you don't mind.
Yes,
And I think we will come back to this idea of the international or European and what does that even mean, especially these days. But I wanted, because you gave me a nice bridge to Rodia's work in the idea of traveling, because iCoDaCo project is mainly online. So I'm also wondering how that impacts this sensing the experience, as you said. But I'm now want to ask Rodia, because she does a lot of traveling in her work between Greece, Netherlands, and Cyprus. And I was wondering, and also interestingly, she also works as a dramaturg, but she likes to work with other dramaturgs in a collective, which is also interesting or unusual setup from the position of classical dramaturgy. So I'm wondering about two things. One is your insistence to stay in touch with different contexts, also in relation to East and West, but also like this insistence to work with other dramaturgs collectively.
Thank you also for the invitation. For the description, I'm a white woman in my 30s with blondish hair, and today I'm wearing a red sweater, and I have a cold, so my voice is a bit weird, so sorry for that. Yes, I already have a lot to say also from Israel's provocation. So indeed, I am insisting on traveling and being based in between 3 places, even though I only say 2. The reality is 3. And this is Greece, that I'm originally from, the Netherlands, that I am doing a PhD, and my dramaturgical practice is developed here, and Cyprus. And that is partly because I want to, and partly because I need to sustain myself as a dramaturg. So of course, coming from Greece, from the periphery, or the so-called periphery, in one way, you can also argue that it's not a periphery, but it is in terms of also geographically. Of course, I always wanted to go to the West to have better opportunities. I'm also a generation growing up in the crisis, big financial crisis in Greece, so the future was very dark. So of course I was part of this wave of people going to the West to study and to build a career, especially in the arts, and even more in dance dramaturgy, which is a very specific field. But being in the West, being in the center, I start being more and more interested in what is happening back to the periphery. So I start going back to Greece and then to Cyprus, which is even further away, and trying to also connect these 3 contexts. So I found myself in operating these very different political, social, economical, and artistic fields as a dramaturg. And this gives me very good opportunity to be reflective on each one of it every time that I go and I leave. So I have this oscillation between distance and zooming in, which I really like, and it really enriches my work. But the reality is also that I could not sustain myself, since we are talking about sustainability, by only living and working in Greece as a dramaturg, even if I want to. So it's also a system that I found in order to be able to call myself a dramaturg and work as a dramaturg only, and not do side jobs of different kinds. And working as a dramaturg in these different contexts, of course, I found myself being very lonely, because there is this paradox in dramaturgy that it's always relational. So you're always in relation to a process, to a choreographer, to an institution, to a maker. It doesn't matter. You can almost not exist without it, without them, without the relationship, and still it's a very lonely place to be. So while I was also developing my PhD research, I started being more interested in, okay, but what our other dramaturgs are doing also. So how can we exchange our practices, and how can we start practicing together dramaturgy without necessarily having an object, a performance.
Great. Can I interrupt you? I'm gonna now, because you were talking about this kind of relationality, and I want to go back to Israel and ask now, with that relationality in mind, we have very different temporalities in iCoDaCo. We have a European project that includes very different political and social context. And as Katya said in her provocation, culture is a deeply Western concept, but then contemporary dance is even more, to some extent, Western product, or Western European, and then USA as well. So in a way, how do you think, or because it's also the beginning, so we don't know how it will develop, but maybe you can say something about navigating these different temporalities as also someone who is facilitating these processes, or at least around expectations around these different temporalities.
Thank you. I'll just say very quickly that it's come to my attention that there's maybe some technical difficulties with writing questions in the chat. So later on, the flow will be open for questions. So people who have questions, keep them in mind. And later on, the flow will be open and you will have the opportunity to pose your questions. So back to relationality. I think, and I actually am speaking to you now from Brussels because I was here at the grant holders meeting or gathering at the European Commission and Creative Europe. And I got into an interesting conversation with someone who is working in the Commission. And I know it's a bit of a detour, but I will get to it. And I spoke about how I think it's incredibly important that more choreographers will be involved in the fantasy of projects, in the imagination of projects. There's something about multiplicity in relation to relationality that I think within dance practices of whatever origin they have or whatever heritage or lineage they have, there's something about multiplicity that we encounter and experience in movement and dance practices that is becoming more and more, I think, required in thoughts about durability, or even if we allow ourselves to use the term of sustainability. And what it means is, how do we actually navigate this multiplicity that you mentioned? iCoDaCo of this iteration, the 2024 to 2027 edition, is built specifically, or maybe precisely, with the multiplicity of lenses. We are interested in what does it actually do in the world if we get a critical mass of artists literally across the continent, because our partnership is starting in Georgia in the east and goes all the way to the west in Portugal. And of course, we don't have partners and artists and activities across every single place, but we do have some kind of a spread, and that spread is interesting. And what happens if people come from all of these different places, but are somehow gathered around a curiosity and the devotion or the dedication to sort of think and work and process things together? So there is a collective identity or a collected identity. I keep thinking about whether it's an international contemporary dance collection or collective. And that is maybe something also to reflect upon. What are the similarities and the differences between collection and collective? And at the same time, this mass of many, the multi-vocality, the multi-focality of this experiment is also kind of subdivided to so-called, and this is really so-called, national context. So there is actually some place in this project to speak about or speak to or work through what it means to have an experience of we are here, and what is this here of ours? What do we relate to when we think about a here? You know, because the collective of collectives gives us maybe a notion of over there, but what is the here? And then there's also a sincere interest in the individual. Now, individual, let's also remember that it's not a singularity. Individual is also an ecosystem. And it's ecosystem of labor, and it's ecosystem of temporalities, and it's ecosystem of desire, and it's ecosystem of a lot of multiplicities. So it's very stratified, this project. And we are trying to find a way, and like you said, we are quite in the beginning of it. We are interested in what it means to try and hold all of these layers simultaneously and let them cross-pollinate, infect, mutate, morph, without feeling that that change is an end of something. So try not to cut very sharp lines between these different elements, aspects, and forms of life, really. So, yeah, please.
Yeah, I was just thinking, because there's a word that is kind of floating in my head and in the room, but we don't talk about it explicitly. And I think it was very, very feasible for me, both in Katya's and Rodia's and yours talk now, and that solidarity between different forms of labor, different instances, and different ways of aligning yourself within that multiplicity. And then I think I would like to ask maybe even Katya, if you want to join, because also this kind of discussions can remain in a vacuum of, you know, not concrete. That's why I'm trying to bring them to the concrete practices and methodologies. So maybe what are the examples of solidarity that you maybe can think of from your practice or from your surroundings that could possibly, I think the Slovenian syndicate is one of these examples, that could lead to this kind of shared vision of a culture as a common good. Like they can be very like small, but maybe do you have your, or in a way with Rodia, I see, for instance, the way how you spend your time between Greece and Cyprus and Netherlands, and the necessity of once you made it in the West to go back there and be there. So I was wondering if there are some examples from any of your practices.
Yeah, I can share. I think I have a very personal one that I have created this system of distribution of wealth, I would say, in how I am getting paid in these different contexts that I work. And because they have very different financial situations and working conditions. So I see it as a form of solidarity that the fact that I'm doing some works in the Netherlands and I'm getting paid well, but then I can go back to Greece and do other jobs in a not so well paid or according to my standards or according to the standards of the European standards. But because I do that in the Netherlands, I can go back in Greece and offer a much lower fee to makers that they also don't have funding because in Greece, not only in Greece, but that's my context, where there is a lack of big infrastructures, funding, institutions. We need to create our own frameworks, our own ways to do things. So this is for me a form of solidarity, I would say, in a very small scale, of course. And the other example is also coming from Greece, that even though it's a very small community of dramaturgs, dance dramaturgs working, the first time that we actually came together, 5 of us, and decided to do something together was to write a public letter as an opposition or as a critical thinking provocation to the way that some of the biggest festival in Greece chooses their curators for dance. And it was the first time that solidarity brought us together as dramaturgs, even though we were all friends, but to actually do almost a political action to address something in the Greek context. Yeah.
Can I jump in here? Or yeah, is it okay? I want to say something about also this massive undertaking of doing iCoDaCo as a large European cooperation project. It's very rare that a small independent organization, even more specifically in dance, is actually a coordinator of a large European cooperation project. This is not a coincidence. It's actually something that for me has been very important because I've been obviously very active in the field for so many years. And this kind of chant that there's no money in the arts keeps repeating, and specifically from the mouths of artists. And then at the same time, I encountered information about how there are actually millions of euros out there. However, it's more often than not that artists do not get access because the money runs out when it arrives at the artist's hands. It's mostly within either physical structures, administrative infrastructures, governmentally driven initiatives, and so on and so forth. So it's actually that it's not true to say that there's no money in arts and culture, but it's very true to say that there's no money for artists. So I was interested in what would it actually mean if I allow myself, for example, if I speak from my perspective, to employ the kind of rigorous practice of the choreographic practice in the context of funding. What would that mean? Because we know as artists that our curiosities, desires, passions don't actually cease to exist at the end of a project. There's some kind of organic process, evolution that goes on with us. The practice keeps being practiced. We are practicing the practice. So what is this praxis in regards to how do we accumulate experience, knowledge, and information? We allow ourselves to be audacious. We allow ourselves to be tenacious. We allow ourselves to push through the challenge as a choreographic process, how to gather bodies in space and time in this completely alternative context of funding structures. And I was really interested in how to actually create an environment in which many artists benefit. Because in most large European cooperation projects, there's about 10 artists, 20 artists, you know? It's not really a critical mass. Also, what it means in terms of the custodianship, like who is holding the authorship and the authority over what is this practice that we refer to as contemporary dance? Because if only 10 artists get access to the creative processes within large European cooperation project, which is the largest sum of money we can access in the cultural sector in Europe, what happens if even when there's so much resources, it's only given to a very small pool of voices? So iCoDaCo in that regard is actually a political action. It's to try and subvert this paradigm and think about channeling the money from up there to the artists. And this is why there's a big number of artists involved in iCoDaCo, much more than most European cooperation projects.
There is a great deal in this room what we call from the partisan times like figure it out sort of logic of doing things, which is, I think it's something about having the know-how how the system works, or centering these labor processes, as Katja said, but also knowing how to work around the system, because this is also sometimes necessary, as you said. But I wondered, because you said you're also a choreographer, and then you say how to gather these bodies in space and times. And I was wondering, in relation to both of your practices, how are these social and political choices conditioning also the aesthetics, or the aesthetic practice, the artwork itself?
I personally have made a decision that if I want to sustain myself as a dramaturg, as a dance dramaturg, I'm actually not so much dealing with the aesthetics. And that means that I'm not choosing who I'm working with based on their aesthetics. I'm choosing who I work with based on ethics, for sure, based on conditions, based on relationships, but the aesthetics is not something that I would consider. And that means that the persons I'm working with, they are very, very different. They have very different languages, aesthetics, styles. And this is, for me, a specific self-positioning as a dramaturg that relates with centering the labor process, actually.
It's very interesting, I think. I like the notion of economy of ethics, but I'm then immediately reminded of the aesthetics of ethics, mm-hmm. and what aesthetics ethics produce. And you know, it's interesting also to connect to the provocation from Katja, but also to what I just said about money or resources and how they're not channels towards artists, but actually they kind of get stuck in the mechanisms of art production in a way. Thinking about what Katja said about culture and art and the relationships that occur between what we might perceive as culture and what we might perceive as art, as well as I'm allowing myself to add who we see as an art maker and who we see as an artist. Thinking about this pressure of branding and the idea of a singular sort of voice or a singular sort of aesthetics, which also completely prevents artists from practicing the practice, because if you keep practicing, it means that you keep changing. And the idea that we have to brand ourselves and to sort of think about the economy of responsibility to our so-called customers and how we need to deliver the product, which is still the case in a large part of our so-called contemporary dance. And what I mean when I say so-called contemporary dance is because the contemporaneity of the dance practice kind of is diluted by the pressures from the market. So I think when we think about collectivity and when we think about collective of collectives, which is an insane idea, because a collective on its own is already precisely challenging this singularity, this idea that you can brand yourself. Because of the relationality that we mentioned earlier, it requires that you keep checking in with yourself in relation to others. Others keep checking in with themselves in relation to you. And then there's this entity that emerges that is so-called the collective. And then because we have, it's a long process, then also these multiple identities keep changing, and also life goes on and the world keeps changing. So all of these relationalities and multiplicities kind of challenge the notion of the market. You know, that you will find your product, you will keep producing your product, and then your customers will keep buying the product. So we are trying to actually break that notion and create an environment that keeps the ground uneven. So you cannot solidify. You cannot solidify yourself. You cannot solidify your identity. And in a way, you are encouraged to not having to do it, because the ground on which you're standing is in itself not stable. So there's no expectation that you would be stable. And then what stabilizes in this kind of environment is interesting in relation to, again, this sustainability, durability, longevity. What do you stand on then? It's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, we didn't touch very much the notion of sustainability, because it feels like it's difficult to think about sustaining artwork at the moment. So I think there is something about still figuring it out, because this is the very first public presentation or the public conference around iCoDaCo. So maybe it's also to say that we don't know what it will do, but I think what you say, Israel, is important, and this is sustaining that multiplicity on an uneven terrain. And that's why I opened also with the, yes, we all know the obvious, but I think it's important to understand that even in this project frame, we are not on the same sort of ground. And then also what Katya said, I think it's very important to say how to demystify this subjectivity of an artist, that it's alone and suffering, but rather to turn yourself to find alliances within different fields or within your own field, but different contexts, which is in a way how you, Radia, like make your practice is between and with these different contexts. I think my time is slowly running out, but maybe we have, or Johan will interrupt me soon, but maybe we have time for one final sort of reflection, and I'm gonna bring a unpopular topic of hope. So what do you hope for the for this experiment, which is iCoDaCo Israel? Like, it can be very, very impulsive and not elaborated.
In relation to what I said earlier about money to artists, money to art, money to culture,
You hope for money.
I want to say that I hope that this a trend of cutting the resources for arts and culture and then directly influencing the reality of artists in combination with the political restrictions that a lot of artists are experiencing, even in the so-called Europe, which, like you said, there's at least 2 of them, but there's even many more. And even inside Europe, we are experiencing different levels of freedom and security and access to resources. So on a bigger context, my hope is that this trend will somehow at least deviate or stop or change. And I hope that initiatives like iCoDaCo do their part in sort of placing the practice in the very heart of what we're doing and not thinking about strategic initiatives, but rather how to allow the practice to inform us and allow that to reverberate into our communities and into our society. So encourage artists to, yes, trust the practice, trust the process. You know, keep your hands on the rock, feet in the soil, keep pushing the boulder up the hill, knowing that it will roll down and you will do it again. Get in love, like fall in love with a practice again and again and again. This is my hope, that iCoDaCo would offer some kind of environment where artists can do that and do it together and feel that they are supported by this affiliation with others. Yeah.
And I would like to add that it is important that the money is important, that the artists can get paid for their work and for research. I think this is something that then makes this platform in the context of many research grants for artists being cut, even in very privileged Berlin, that makes it in a way very relevant. And Rodia, I'm not going to ask you about hope, but I'm going to ask you.
Can I just add something in this nice image that Israel gave about the artists insisting on the practice and keep rolling the ball? I would say yes, but without hoping to get paid, but asking for it.
Yeah, and but maybe I wanted to ask you also about what do you hope actually that your work that you keep rolling and keep bringing from Netherlands to Greece and to Cyprus. We didn't talk enough about Cyprus in this context, but what do you hope that can instigate within the community?
Yeah, as I said, I'm also very focused on dramaturgy, so I would again focus on dramaturgy. So I hope that I could make this invisibility of the dramaturg, first of all, that doesn't have to appear to the photo, to actually appear in the photo as a labor practice, and then dramaturgy as a practice to between many, specifically to have time and space to be explored and developed and exchanged between people, dramaturgs or not dramaturgs. But this politicized idea of dramaturgy as a practice of many that can be very, very valuable.
Yeah, and just to add, this dramaturg that doesn't appear in the photo, for those that don't know, that's a quote from Marianne van Kerkhoven, one of the inventors of contemporary dramaturgy from the West. But as we know, there are from at least both of our two contexts, there are other with other kind of really.
Mila, your connection was unstable. Maybe you can repeat your last.
Is it stable now?
Yes, go on.
Yes. It has to happen. The conditions of contemporary work, of course, it has to happen at the end. I wanted to say that I wanted to contextualize the quote that Rodia brought in about dramaturg that's not on the photo, and say that there are also many other ways of practicing dramaturgy that are not from the West, at least from our context that we know. And I wanted to say thank you for this and actually give the word to Johan.
Yeah, thank you very much for this. It's a fantastic and very spontaneous and honest conversation. I'm very happy also that you could share very openly and freely your thoughts and your feelings also about dance, about your work, your own practice, and in a way your insistence or your emergencies and how you despite or because of the world we are in, you actually navigate and persist. And I like very much this word of persistence. Maybe it's less positive than hope, but somehow it brings hope too. I'm gonna give the floor to Katya, but I really wanted to apologize because we were made aware during the conversation that the chat box was not working. And you could not, as participants, post your comments and questions to the speakers along the conversation. So we decided to maybe propose you to, for those of you who have a very urgent comment and question, to raise their digital hand. And Lucrezia, our stage manager, will make you appear on the screen and make sure that you can channel your questions to the speaker of your choice or to the entire group. So do we have anybody who has an urgent question and wants to raise their hand? Not yet. But maybe what we could do, if you agree, Mila, is give the floor to Katya, because I saw that during all the conversation, she was nodding, she was approving, making faces, taking notes, and having and I have a feeling that you have some comments on your own that you would like to channel, or at least to some takeaways that you feel are resonating particularly with your own research. So Katya, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. My mic is on, right?
Yes.
Okay. No, I was nodding, because these issues are very dear to my heart, and some of the things that Israel and Rodia and Mila said, I think are really important when you think about this idea of collectivity. I really appreciated Mila's emphasis on solidarity. I think it is important to talk about that term. It is, it has, at least probably for Mila and myself, coming from these post-Yugoslav territories, right, where solidarity was part also of our history, maybe more mine than Mila since I'm older. But I think this practicing of solidarity becomes, I think, very important when we think about the issues that were raised. And I think because, as much as we want to talk about collectivity and doing things together and sharing like Israel said, the good and the bad, and moving through these processes, I think it is, I think that really matters, right? That we, for instance, Rodia mentioned how she navigates her own idea of solidarity by sharing resources, right? Which I think is one way of how we all do these things, right? We are sharing these resources and we keep making decisions. And I think that is definitely one way, right? When we can use that, we use it, right? But where is the limit? I think that the question of collectivity and solidarity, I would push us also thinks about, again, right, not us as individuals making certain sacrifices. Yes, we do. It depends on the power and the position we are in. And I think it is very important to do them, especially when we can. And when we are in a position of power to make decisions that benefit those who are in less fortunate situations, and to build solidarity and alliances in that way, right, is why I keep asking, which side are you on? Right? Where do you position yourself in this power structure? But I think also for us as individuals who maybe in marginalized positions, I think it is very, very important to not internalize these larger structures and to push against them, and to find solidarity with others who are in this position to push against them. Not to say I am going to give my resources, but to ask, like Israel, I think very importantly emphasized, where does the money go, right? Where does it disappear? How does it not trickle down, or actually it does trickle down with the, nano millimeters of whatever the water they are giving to the actual, right, really important process, right, that is the art practice, and that is making these connections and relations and so on. And so I think that that's what I appreciate, and if you are going to do this in this project, I would really congratulate you and encourage you to continue to put the pressure on this question of who and how this money is distributed, because it is so important. It is not given to the practice itself. It is not given to the artists, and that's why I wanted to provoke you, right? And that's why I said all these institutions are built on exploitation of labor and of our passion. And there is nothing wrong with our passion. I will always agree about that. But we ourselves need to say enough of exploitation of our passion and of our love, of our dedication, and turn it back to the system and say, okay, redistribute. Put your money where your mouth is, right? Sustainability. I think another comment I want to make. Sustainability, it occurred to me as we talk, is yet another ideological term that is being pushed around. A couple of days ago, I studied with my students an article about leadership, and it explained the history of how the idea of leadership came to be very important in certain policy documents and so on. And it happened concurrently with the rise and more pressures from neoliberal policies, which cut the funding. What we have right now is more cuts to the funding, to the important things that make our lives actually, right, thrive. And then we bring the term as sustainability. Well, let's ask, how is the European Union and how can we make them to implement this sustainability on the level of our very basic needs, of supporting financially the labor process of artists, of everyone else included in these processes, right? Not to have these large, lofty, again, ideas of sustainability, which are unapplicable to anyone, right? We talk about sustainability, but we struggle more and more. And I really also appreciated Rodia's points, right? Because I share her predicament in a way of traversing different contexts, right? I come from the periphery, which is a little bit north than hers, right? From Slovenia. I live in US, so I live in a completely different, again, context. But this periphery, semi-peripheries, from which we go in and out, and with which we have contact, I think are really important in this sense, right? And again, right, how they impact us, right? What is this sustainability, right? When we actually constantly need to move these contexts in order to survive, in order to actually do what we love and what we want to do. And I think that this, the question of different systems and how there is resources in the center, I think that is so brilliant that you said it, Rodia, because, right, that's how we are supposed to make this sustainable, is we go to the center and then we bring it to the periphery. But not by investing in the periphery. And I think that, again, right, these are, I think, some of the ways in which I think your project, which wants to think about collectivity, which wants to also think about solidarity, which wants to think about how to change the ideas of where the money goes and why artists are not part of these processes, that you have an actual chance to develop certain things in terms of actual real practices. Because, again, like I said, I think don't internalize the pressures, but push them out. No, one thing that came to my mind when you were asking Mila about solidarity and examples, right, was when we were doing, when you started the groundwork to actually form the union. It was one way of how to kind of like make us not passive, but to become agents. And we used a very, very, let's say, I'm trying to say, something that really works in organizing a context. We started the conversation, what are the 3 things you would want to change, right, about your working conditions? So we didn't ask, how bad are your working conditions? Tell us, because we know, right? We know. In and offline, publicly, informally, we know how bad they are. But how do we want to change them? And I think that this question help us to detect commonalities. A lot of things we wanted to change were similar. And then we asked the question of which of these things that we want to change, right? Immediately. Like if the question was, what do you want to change if you could today, right? About your practice and about your work. And then we tried to really scan the answers and see which of these issues impacts the most of us, and that also resonates with others outside of the arts. And I think that this is where we can connect, right? Is to think also beyond the art and see how we can, I like the hope. You said it's unpopular. I think we need hope because the times are so brutally dark, so hopeless, and we, to a certain extent, I think, feel very powerful today in light of relentless demonstration of violence, of brutal power, which gives no leeway, right, for us to hope. But I think we need to hope, and then we need to push back. And so I think I'll stop here so somebody else can.
Yeah, thank you, Katja. I like very much that you finished by the term hope. Like again, and indeed we need. I can see a digital hand that rose, and it's Sebastian Matthias who rose his hand. So maybe Lucrezia, we can pin Sebastian and making sure he can make
Can you hear me?
his comment. We hear you. We hear
Yes.
you. We don't see you, but we hear you.
Okay, so thank you for giving me some possibility to speak. Thank you very much for these wonderful elaborations. Me coming now from a field of sustainability and thinking about the socio-ecological crisis, and since you were kind of referring the beginning to the current crisis, I'm wondering how like social credit comes into it. So not only like money as a currency for solidarity, which kind of for me leads into a certain kind of classical class struggle, but I'm very interested in the moment how social credit and like education and knowledge for the knowledge worker is kind of feeding into, and how that somehow I feel is somewhat in resistance to solidarity or collectivity or bringing together a certain kind of strength of the community. If we're thinking about this from the position of only our dance community, then maybe it's a bit different. But if you think of a wider social context, I'm wondering how would you think about or position social credit, social status through art making, through designing discourse? How would you position that in that what you've been talking about? Because
Thank you, Sebastian, for your.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. I think it's a very relevant question, and it is somehow connected also to how the knowledge circulates, which I think it's a very important dimension is such a big scale project, but also in terms of how do we connect internationally. So maybe Israel, I will give you the floor on this one.
Thank you. I think it's very important to reflect on that, and I think people might be familiar with knowledge power, with this connection of how knowledge equals power, power equals knowledge, and it kind of circulates. I would throw in to this also resources. And resources can be knowledge as resources, but it can also be tangible or intangible resources. And I think in iCoDaCo, this is kind of what we are trying to do in terms of the methodologies that we are implementing. Speaking about the tangibility, the physicality, the visceral experience of dance and live performance, and how can we actually still maintain that whilst also kind of decentralizing the knowledge dissemination. We're trying to sort of expose the thinking and the process of artists and artistic practice. And this is why we are working. One of the things we're doing in the project is actually imagining what would it need to be if we build, and we are going to build it, a digital platform in which people can interact with international knowledge from over there, but it goes from artists to artists. What we have at this point is mostly the academia, the context in which research is being done, or research institutes that also then rely on the structure of academic research. What we are trying to do in iCoDaCo is actually to keep the artistic practice as the context of research and stimulate it and challenge it because of the collectivity and the multiplicity that we suggested earlier, or that we described earlier. So I think in terms of the knowledge power relationships, I think we're using collectivity, multiplicity in the context of the physical and virtual. So even there, we are trying to think about how can we disseminate and share and decentralize and democratize knowledge, but at the same time, not actually disregard the physical aspect of the practice. So how do we keep the practice physical, but transmit the knowledge digitally? Is it possible? How is it possible? This is also something we're busy with.
Thank you, Israel. I don't know if Rodia, Mila, or even Katya, you have a comment on this aspect of social credit and you want to very briefly add something? Yes, Katya?
I mean, I would add to the question of social credit again, what I mentioned earlier, right, is that we always need to be aware also of the position of power that we occupy in these systems, because we always have some power. We like to think about ourselves very much as victims, but we are not, even when we are, right? There is always an aspect of power, and within what Sebastian was asking, I think that within this context, it is important to whom we give the voices, right? What do we bring in, right? How do we confront this epistemic violence, that is a term that is used, right? When you interpret certain groups in a certain particular way, it is important to resist. And I think important to resist that there are various forms of knowledge. And I think, like you said, Israel, it's important, right? It's not just the verbal. It's also different forms of knowledge get created in these collectives, and sometimes, and very often, and especially, we know this in the US from indigenous cultures, right? That there are various forms of knowledge that are very important, but are very often discredited because they are not rational, they are not verbal, they are not, right? European violence, epistemic violence on these forms of knowledges. But I think mostly it's also academic world to a certain extent is also very similar to the art world, in the sense that there is this constant pressure of this individualization, of isolation, of competing with your colleagues, and we need to stop that. It is on us to stop that. It's very hard because the system keeps pressuring us to compete. But I think, we need to resist it. We have to stop competing, because there are certain things we share. And this is where I see how you break this and how you can use your, the question of social or cultural capital and credit. you can use it and use it wisely and ask yourself which side are you on. I think that's the way to do it.
Thank you, Katja. Mila, I see you have your hand raised. 1 minute.
Yeah, I'm gonna be very short. I think this is a matter of awareness for me, and to understand from which position I'm speaking when I'm speaking, from which context, because we already had that in the project in different understanding of what dance is. And I think it's really important to articulate your position as many times as you need, and to also acknowledge your privilege and where are you coming from. And I think that's a sensibility thing.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for this beautiful conclusion, actually. And it's actually really full of hope. There are very concrete decisions to be made and all actions to be made individually and collectively. So it is my real pleasure to thank you, dear speakers, dear moderator, dear provocator, and really to say how much we are pleased to have this first online event in the iCoDaCo project. Of course, I need to say that there will be others. It's just the first time, and there will be plenty of other opportunities, not only to connect digitally, but also to exchange through conferences, mini festivals, and many other activities, including a quite big online platform that will be set up. So I'm sure all of you will be in touch with us and us with you. I just need to say that this conference of course, has been recorded and will be made available over time, not only at our partner, All Round Theatre Commons, that I need to thank again, but also on iCoDaCo new website and during the various events that we will be organizing. I need to thank also the National Captioning Institute. They have been captioning all this discussion, and I really appreciate this effort to make our work accessible to as much people as possible. And I also really want to thank Lucrezia Ponzano, our stage manager of the day, that tried as much as possible to establish these chat box and Q&A, etc., running backstage. So thank you very much for this. The conference is now over. So I really hope you will go to our website, icodaco.com, and you will register and subscribe to receive the newsletter of the project. Thank you very much.